Before discussing the Missouri legislature, I want to take a step back into Missouri history and review what was then called the alum scandal. In 1899, the legislature passed a pure food law that prohibited the use of arsenic, calomel, bismuth, ammonia, or alum in the manufacture of any food product. The intent of the law was to eliminate poisonous substances in food, although it was not clear that alum was dangerous. What was clear is that the secret sponsor of the bill was the Royal Baking Powder Company, the only manufacturer using cream of tartar instead of alum as a leavening agent. While the alum interests prepared for repeal in 1901, the Royal Baking Powder Company set up a front organization, the National Health Society, to create propaganda about the harmful effects of alum. They hired former Missouri Congressman and Governor William Stone to serve as the lobbyist for the Missouri Health Society, a dummy agency for a front organization consisting of 3 members. The Missouri Health Society actually employed chemists to test competitors' products for alum and forwarded their results to prosecuting attorneys. Stone testified before the Committee on Criminal Jurisprudence about alum's threat to public health, and the committee voted against the repeal and the Senate adjourned. The Committee on Criminal Jurisprudence had 7 members that were handpicked by Lieutenant Governor John Lee. Lee was the owner-editor of the Interstate Grocer, a weekly trade journal that relied on the Royal Baking Powder Company for advertisements. From the National Health Society, Lee solicited $8,500, of which he kept $1,500 and distributed $1,000 each to senators on the Criminal Jurisprudence Committee. The Cole County Grand Jury reported that the extent of the venality existing among the makers of our state laws is alarming to those who believe in free government. Our investigations have gone back for 12 years, and during that time, the evidence before us shows that corruption has been the usual and accepted thing in state legislation. Laws have been sold to the highest bidder in numerous instances. Senators have been on the payroll of lobbyists and have served special interest instead of the public good. Ultimately, indictments were handed down, Stone was humiliated, Lee resigned, and no one was ever convicted. It's a good thing it's not like that today. Well, good afternoon. Welcome back to another fun-filled afternoon with Missouri government and politics. Last time we talked about the big picture, the General Assembly, mainly the difference between the House and the Senate, and how the differences between the House and the Senate within Missouri, and also how they stack up against other states. Does anybody have any questions about the structural, the heterogeneity, the milk joke, any of that kind of stuff from last time? All right. Today, I'm going to focus on the how a bill becomes law. I mean, you go back to the Grammar Rock videos and that classic, how does a bill become law? I think you learn this. This is one of those things you learn in 4th grade, you learn in junior high, you learn and so on. But basically, I want to draw in your heads, I want you to picture a member of the House or picture a member of the Senate with a piece of legislation in their hand and introducing it to the General Assembly. And that's the process that I want to step through today. Now, we said last time there's not a huge difference between the structure of the House and the Senate in Missouri or the structure of the House and the Senate of the United States. But the process for how a bill becomes law is probably more precise, maybe more technical in Missouri, but I think the key issue is transparency. Most of the legislative process in Missouri has built-in spots where any citizen of Missouri can see what is happening. This is true with respect to the electronics. You can go to the Missouri government website, and we'll put the link on the class, and you can always find out where's the status of this bill. But even before the internet, even before the computers and iPhones and so on, the process was open to Missouri citizens. We talked about Missouri being democratic in contrast to the United States. This is another element where the process includes places for you to see what's going on. So, I want to start with filing. Filing a bill is the technical term for introducing the bill. The member of the House, member of the Senate files the bill. Now, an interesting aspect of Missouri, we said last time that the session begins in January. In Missouri, you can pre-file. Beginning in December 1st, before the session starts, you can pre-file your bill. Now, we talked about this last time. The session is over in about 4.5 months, and if it didn't get done, you got to start all over again. Or there's lots of stuff that we didn't even get to, something that we didn't quite finish. There's lots of reasons. So December 1st, even before the session begins, you can pre-file your bill. And what we've seen with respect to pre-filing is an increase. More and more bills being pre-filed because you want to get in the gate. If you wait to January or wait until February, you may not get through the process. So that option of pre-filing is different. And you can also file through the 60th day. Members of the House and Senate can file their bills up through 60 days of the legislative session. If you want to file a bill on day 61, you can't. And again, if it's at the 60th day, the odds of it getting through the process are not very high. And so there's a lot of political factors, some constitutional factors, but mainly the issue is timing. If the legislature only meets for 4.5 months, you got to get that bill filed, and you got to get it filed early. So pre-filing is an important aspect of it. The second stage of the legislative process is simply called the first reading. And the clerk reads the title of the bill and gives it its number. So if it's a House bill, it'll have a House number. If it's a Senate bill, it has a Senate number. But the clerk will simply read the title of a bill for the provision of watering plants in the state of Missouri. And that's it. That doesn't seem like very much, but what does it say? It says this bill has been introduced, and it's entered into the public record. So people might, so what's the big deal? But the first reading is that first sign that your representative, your senator, has introduced the legislation, and everybody knows it. Now, the second stage, Carlos, do you want to hazard a guess what we're going to call this? Yes, it's not rocket science, it's the second reading. After filing and the first reading, there is a formal second reading. The clerk reads the title again, and more importantly this time, the bill is assigned to a committee. Now, in Missouri, much like in the United States, the committees are defined by subject matter. A bill having to do with this subject goes to this committee. Now, again, we talked about the speaker having discretion, and that's probably the 200 level version of this class. But at the second reading of the bill, a bill is assigned for committee consideration. Now, this is important. According to the Missouri State Constitution, every bill that is introduced is entitled to committee consideration. Every bill is entitled to committee consideration. So it's not just me introducing the bill, it's me introducing the bill that will get some consideration by a House or Senate committee. So next, we'll go over here to the committee hearing itself. The committee hearings are divided into two parts, a public hearing and an executive hearing. At the public hearing, the bill is presented by the sponsor. If I am introducing the bill, then I introduce the bill to the committee. I present the bill to the committee, and then what you see on TV, basically testimony from opponents and proponents of the bill. So if this is where the bill is introduced to the legislature itself, the committee hearing is where the bill is introduced to the committee in the specialization that covers the bill. And they hear testimony from proponents of the bill, people in favor of the legislation, and opponents of the bill, people who are opposed to the legislation. The second step in the committee hearing is the executive session, which, ironically, is open to the public. This is one of those things, if I could change the terms, I would, but the public hearing is open to the public, and the executive hearing is also open to the public. This is just the technical term for what they do. This is where the committee votes on the bill and makes its recommendation. This is where the committee votes on the bill and makes its recommendation. And there are basically four options at the committee stage. One is called do pass. Now, John, do not pass. Now I'm going to run out of room here. Option number one is do pass. Option number two is do not pass. Option number three is do pass with amendments. So yeah, we'll amend it a little bit and pass it. And then option number four is do pass a substitute. Do pass a substitute is taking another bill, similar subject, similar in its structure, similar in its intent most of the time, but instead of amending the bill that was introduced, it is completely replaced by a substitute bill. So the committee at the executive stage has these four options. Pass the bill as is, do not pass the bill at all, pass the bill with amendments, or replace that bill with a substitute. Okay, questions? Again, technical stuff, but it's basically these four options before it is sent on. Now, after the committee hearing, now I have to erase. A new wrinkle has arisen in the Missouri House, and that is the Rules Committee. Now, this is something that I personally would like to study a little bit further, the role of the Rules Committee in Missouri. But there's a companion Rules Committee in the United States House, and it's worth talking about the difference. What does the Rules Committee in Missouri do? Well, it gets any bill that is considered do pass. So any committee that recommends a bill pass, do pass, it goes to the Rules Committee. And the Rules Committee has an option. The Rules Committee can recommend that bill to the House with a time limit on debate. If a bill is recommended by the committee, do pass, it goes to the Rules Committee, and the Rules Committee recommends it to the House itself with a time limit, or, Joni? or without a time limit. All right, pause just for a second. Take a deep breath. The House Rules Committee at the United States level is one of the most important, if not the most important committee in the United States House, because what goes into the Rules Committee makes a difference in terms of whether the legislation is passed or not. The structure of the Rules Committee, when the Rules Committee was created in the Missouri General Assembly, it was created as a way to deal with time constraints. What we talked about last time. They meet for 4.5 months, and at the end of those 4.5 months, oftentimes they don't have time to finish everything. The idea behind the Rules Committee is to structure the debate, to say, okay, how much time are we going to spend on this? Historically, bills were passed and sent to the House, the floor of the House, with absolutely no time limit. So if we want to spend the next 3 days debating this bill, we do. Well, if you spend the next 3 days debating every single bill that comes through, then you get less and less done. So the Rules Committee was established to try and curtail the time spent on legislation. Again, we don't have time to do all of the nuances, but the Rules Committee takes the due pass and forwards that on to the House with a time restriction to control the amount of time or without a time restriction. And what you're going to see, if we follow this into the future, you're going to see more bills recommended from the Rules Committee in the House with a time limit, because the House is going to have to constrain the amount of time it spends. They just don't have the luxury of time. So as we see an increased number of special sessions to deal with issues, we're going to see an increased number of bills reported from the Rules Committee. Now, last but not least, we have the perfection stage. The perfection stage. This is debate. This is the debate on the floor for the first time. The perfection stage is debate on the floor for the first time. And this is where amendments to bills are considered. So this is the time where everybody in the House gets to hear the bill. This is the first time the entire legislature sees the entire bill. Whether it's the original bill with amendments or the substitute, this is the first time that all members of the House see it. This is where they debate the pros and cons. The Speaker calls on Representative so-and-so, the classic how a bill becomes law, and this is also where amendments to that legislation are considered. Once the perfection stage is over, there is one last thing, and that is, coincidentally, a third reading. The third reading is open to debate on the floor, but no amendments are allowed. No amendments are allowed. So this is why the perfection stage is so important. This is where the bill is perfected. So third reading of the bill, no amendments are allowed except something that is technical. So if there was a typo, if there was a dollar amount that was reversed, it said $3 million instead of $3,000, those types of amendments are allowed. But the guts of the bill, the meat of the bill, the intent of the bill, nothing can change at the third reading. And this is where we have our up or down. Does this bill pass the House? Now, what happens in the Senate? The same thing happens in the Senate. So I won't go through the entire process again, but basically you see a parallel process. A member of the House introduces legislation, a member of the Senate introduces legislation. Now, give me the odds. What are the odds of the House and the Senate passing identical bills? The odds are pretty low. We talk about different constituencies, we talk about heterogeneity and homogeneity, we talk about different interests between the House and the Senate members themselves, urban, suburban, rural, you name it, there's a lot of differences in the two chambers. And so ultimately, we have a member of the House with their bill, and we have a member of the Senate with their bill. Again, world-famous illustrations. You saw them here first. What are the odds of these being the same? Not very good. So if they are passed in identical form, it goes to the governor. If they are not passed in identical form, the House can accept the Senate version, or the Senate can accept the House version. What are the odds of that happening? Not nothing, but not very good. So ultimately, sometimes the last step before the governor is a conference committee. And again, this is essentially the same thing that happens at the United States level. The House and the Senate have to pass the bill in the same form. If they can resolve it between the branches of the General Assembly, then great. If not, it goes to a conference committee, and sometimes this is where the real fireworks take place, trying to get the Senate to agree to the House version and vice versa. What will the House take in a compromise? What will the Senate take in a compromise? So ultimately, bills go to a conference committee to iron out the differences. Then it goes back to both chambers. So the conference would have to report the bill to the House, and the House has the opportunity to reject it again and goes back to the Senate. Ultimately, the goal here is to get both chambers to pass the bill in identical form so that it can then go to the governor. Again, mostly the same as the United States level. In order for that bill to become law, it has to go to the governor himself. Now, the governor has basically three options. And I left a little space there for a purpose, so you want to be sure to leave space in between veto and not sign. The governor has the power to veto the bill. The governor has the power to sign the bill. The governor has the power to veto the bill, and the governor has the power to do nothing, not sign the bill. If the governor does not sign the bill, it becomes law. If the governor, yes, if the governor does not sign the bill, it becomes law. Now, in terms of signing the bill, it becomes law. Vetoing the bill, it doesn't become law, and then we kick back into what we talked about last time, that we have an override session and so on. The governor has an additional veto power, and it's called the line item veto. And rather than spending time today, we'll talk about that next time when we talk about the powers of the governor. We'll go through the sign, veto, not sign powers more explicitly. So, goes through the House, goes through the Senate, passed in identical form, gets to the governor, who has the option of signing the legislation, it becomes law, vetoing the legislation, which sends it back to the legislature for them to overturn the veto or let the veto stand if they don't have the votes. And oftentimes, if they don't have the votes, then they're not going to have the veto session, because ultimately you, the taxpayer, is going to pay for that. And then again, the governor has the option of not signing the bill, which then becomes law. Any questions on how the bill becomes law, just the nitty-gritty of the process? Okay, thanks. Next time we're going to talk about the executive branch, and we're going to do basically the same thing again. So thanks very much.